Okay, dear guests, dear military friends, dear diplomats, colleagues, it's a real honor for me to open this event to celebrate the day of our Lithuanian army. Well, Lithuanian army or militaries for us were very important through ages. We just recently celebrated millennium of our statehood, and you know, this little horse that I always wear, it was always with us, you know, through all those ages. Together with our brothers Poles, Belarusians, Ukrainians, Jews and Tatars, then we've been fighting for freedom and independence. In 18th century, we found new brothers in arms, Americans. Then, you know, from then, our generals like Kostushko is still standing and guarding the White House from different enemies of our common freedom. And actually from that moment, I think we've been always standing together. Well, it was exactly the moment that we now celebrate the beginning of well, our independent Lithuania in the beginning of 20th century, when Lithuanian army created us then. It was also during our fight against communist regimes, and by the way, if you see those pictures around, those are the pictures of someone who'd been physically in Gulag in one of those Soviet prisons, and those pictures were actually smuggled during Soviet times by Jamestown Foundation, and now they're here. And of course, later, when we've been fighting for re-establishment of our independence, with some heroes around that we will soon, of course, acknowledge. And then going to NATO, becoming NATO member states, member country, and then going together to Balkans, to Iraq, to Afghanistan, where our contribution, at least, well, to compare per capita, is one of the greatest. So we've been always together. But today, of course, well, we have some heroes around us. Actually, you are all heroes. But some of you been with us during those moments that were quite difficult, where we were not so sure what will actually happen next day. And one of those is Andrew. Eiva, whom you, of course, know, during those years of the beginning of re-establishment of independence, where we had, you know, Soviet tanks and different guns in the streets, where we had people around TV Tower and Parliament fighting for freedom. He was among us. And just a few days ago, we received news from Vilnius that my president signed a decree and decorated this distinguished person with one of the best orders, Order of the Night, the same night. Yeah, and unfortunately, she really wanted to make this decoration in person. So you will be invited to a very big gathering in Vilnius. But I think we should all applaud to this gentleman and congratulate you with this order.
Was rather strange, the set of circumstances that brought me to be involved in the leadership of the Lithuanian militia volunteer forces on January 13th, 1991. Just to fill you in very briefly, the Warsaw Pact, Gorbachev had just let the Warsaw Pact countries go, but he said none of the republics are staying. I mean, none of the republics are leaving. Especially you, Lithuania, which had already declared its independence. There were already 110,000 Soviet troops in Lithuania, and as I arrived to spend 3 weeks of vacation in Lithuania with my newlywed wife, many tank columns were being sent into Lithuania, in addition to the 110,000 troops that were already stationed there. And there was more and more talk that Gorbachev would order the military knockdown of the new Lithuanian democracy. The big move came on January 13th, there was the Soviet armed forces attacked Lithuanian unarmed demonstrators protecting the television tower. They killed 13, wounded hundreds more. Then thus they cut off the communications that the president had with the rest of the country. We at the parliament were next. At about 10:30 a.m. I was sleeping because it had been a long night. And Vytis Milvydas, a former Lithuanian partisan from the 1950s, who had been hanging around the parliament, came over to me and woke me up and said, "Hey, Andriau, all the officers have fled. The Minister of Defense has fled. I know the men are deserting 10 at a time. Our defenses may collapse unless somebody takes charge. I know everything that must be done," said Vytis. He had been a tough war veteran. "But, Andrew, the men know who you are. So I'm appointing you Minister of Defense, and I'll be your deputy and do everything that you need." I said, "Vytis, that sounds pretty good." And we said an Our Father together, and off we went to work. The main defense we had about 20 firearms among the volunteers. About 11 of them were 22 caliber bolt action weapons, and about 6 or 7 were 20 gauge shotguns. That 20 gauge is very small, good for birds at close range. These were hunting weapons that the Soviets allowed, and that's the best we could do. We had one Kalashnikov. So we were working on it. 50,000 Lithuanians had come from all over the country, fighting their way through roadblocks, through checkpoints that the Soviets were running, beating them, arresting them, but still they forced their way through. And these were the best 50,000, 60,000 people. They surrounded the parliament, protected us with their bodies, and they were the first line of defense. And this is a very good way to remember them as well, because the Soviets did what they could to intimidate them. They sent the tanks at them at high speed to try to frighten them, and they would stand their ground. I was up in the headquarters of the parliament at that time, and we had radios. We could listen to the Soviet military frequencies, what they were up to. And I heard them demanding orders from Moscow to attack, to fight their way, to shoot their way through the crowd. That's what the commanders, the Soviet commanders in town wanted to do, which would have been a massacre of many of Lithuania's best citizens. Meanwhile, the crowd was singing the beautiful Lithuanian hymn, Maria Maria, which is, for those of you who are Catholics or Lithuanian Catholics, I would suggest you look at all other languages and all of the prayers to see if it has any powerful prayer to Maria as that one, which the Lithuanians were singing. And I could hear the voices of murder and death coming through the radio, and that beautiful hymn pouring in through the windows, the collision of good and evil. And it was a moment that I will never forget, and I'm privileged to pass it on to you. This is a medal for heroism, so I thought, well, those were the heroic people. What did I do anything particularly heroic then? Well, there was one little moment for about 2 or 3 minutes. There were 3 guys at headquarters in our intelligence section who had 3 of the weapons. It turned out that all 3 of them, it became clear, were working for the Soviet side. So we had a 5th column right in our Tactical Operations Center. The only 3 people with weapons in the Tactical Operations Center were people working for the other side who were going to turn those weapons against us at any critical moment. Our weapon people were already scattered in their defensive positions, and I had no way to pull them together to take these guys out. So I thought back to my West Point unarmed combat classes. And I have about 7 or 8 of my classmates made it here tonight. I'm really honored by you guys. Thanks. And so I figured, well, I nicknamed them Larry, Curly, and Mo, these 3 guys. And Mo was the hardcore killer. He had the killer instinct in his eyes, and I knew I would have to take his rifle first. So I tore his rifle away out of his hands, and then I quickly grabbed the other two fellows, and I was very glad to be alive, and we marched them off, gave the weapons to a sergeant on the site. I'm not going to get into a long story, but so there's one more little interesting incident that will give you a feel for the way things were. Because about an hour later, I get a message as we're organizing our defenses in the Parliament. I get a message: the President wants to see you. It was President Landsbergis, of those of you who remember. And I said, what does he want to see me about? This is not good. I could think of 3 things that he wanted to talk to me about. 1, Andrew, this is a nonviolent resistance movement. What's all this stuff with the Molotov cocktails, the weapons, and so forth? You're going to ruin the whole thing. And I thought up an answer to that. The other thing he might say, Andrew, this place is beginning to smell like a gasoline station. You've had the men make several thousand Molotov cocktails, and if somebody throws a cigarette down in the wrong way, the whole thing's going to go up in a flash of light. Or maybe the best question he could ask me would be, as the President of Lithuania, I was just wondering who the hell appointed you Secretary of Defense? So I walked into his conference room. He says, Andrew, please sit down. He said, Andrew, we live in a new day and age. You take there's a black box in one city, you put a piece of paper in it, and at the same time you put the piece of paper in, a piece of paper comes out of the black box in the other city. Well, Yeltsin was sitting at his black box in another city, and puts this piece of paper in his black box. The same piece of paper comes out of my black box. And it's a treaty of mutual defense between Russia and Lithuania directed against the Soviet Union. A very dramatic, I'm adding the dramatic thing, but it was a pretty dramatic thing. Yeltsin had 3 security guards in one building. It's not like he had a lot of power, but he was the elected president of Russia. And so Landsbergis turns to me and says, well, my advisors tell me this is a treacherous Russian trick. What do you think? I said, well, let's go over it. We go over it, and I say, this is great. Go for it. And so he approved it, put it back in the black box to Yeltsin, and within a few hours, Yeltsin called on Russian soldiers not to participate in violent acts against Lithuanians. And even though the Soviet media managed to black that out and make sure it didn't reach any Russian soldiers initially, we organized smuggling teams to bring it to the critical 5 of the critical 7 airborne divisions that were in the area, so those special units that were our biggest threat could be turned and neutralized in this effort. And there were disturbances reported in 4 or 5 of those divisions after that went out. So that gives you a little quick flavor. The Soviet forces backed off, and I got to turn this over. President Landsbergis, that gentleman, was, when I found out I was getting this, I said, who the hell cooked this whole thing up? So I started checking on who in Lithuania. This was a grassroots movement that began around February. There was some newspaper, when Putin got some award, that some newspaper said, how can we give Putin an award and not give Andrew Eiva an award? So this grassroots movement started. It's the initiator was Eugenius Paikštenis, the director of the Genocide Center. This is just a small list of names, but I do think you want to give him credit. Jonas Oman, a Lithuanian-speaking Swedish Special Forces veteran and an expert on Lithuanian and Afghan resistance. 2 volunteer defenders of Lithuanian Parliament, Arvydas Posius and Ernestas Lukosevičius. Another activist named Darius Žygelis. I don't know much about him except when he got on my Facebook page, he put all his girlfriends on it, and I've been afraid to look at my Facebook page ever since. And then there was Rasa Yuknavichenja from the Homeland Defense Department, whose signature was also crucial to this effort. So I'd like to thank those Lithuanians especially. But it doesn't end there. There's a few other things to say. We Lithuanians, like the United States, have a certain partnership in our love of freedom. It is a very powerful weapon, even though our Lithuanian resistance movement, like 12 other resistance movements backed by the CIA prior to Afghanistan, were betrayed, abandoned, and destroyed. So the United States does not have a good track record in this, and it's a struggle for the United States to express its ideals through its military. Since these days, I had a chance to be involved with Bosnia, Kosovo, and I do have some friends from those efforts. There's Fakiri Taha from Sudan. He's a Nubian from the Sudanese resistance. Nasir Shansab, who worked with me on Afghanistan, is back there. And right now, right now in Afghanistan, a very critical battle is taking place. Lithuanian, American, and Afghans are fighting side by side. The Lithuanians have a disproportionate amount of people. They're holding Gore province. And I was given the assignment a few months ago to look into whether we can win in Afghanistan. And as I looked at it, and I started studying up close, I saw 5 instances where either American Green Berets, heroic Drug Enforcement Agency agents, wonderful Afghan leaders, all in 5 instances had created winning operations at the local level. In all 5 cases, our CIA, our military brass, or our State Department squashed them and pulled the key people out, sticking to their own top-down game plan, not having adopted the idea of empowering freedom. So empowering freedom is our most powerful weapon, whether they are Lithuanian resistance, Afghan resistance, or the most freedom-loving people in the world, which are the Afghans. Empowering, or the Sudanese, who won in Darfur 5 or 6 victories against the Sudanese government this spring at great cost. If we get on this, because we failed to do that, for example, we're getting close to the end here. I talked to, a few months ago, I had a chance to talk to Paul Wolfowitz. And I asked him, on Iraq, sir, if we had supported the Downing plan would have been a better way to do this instead of running the invasion. The Downing plan would have cost us $2 billion and involved 2,000 men. I asked him, would that have been the way to do it? And Wolfowitz said, absolutely. And in Afghanistan, initially, we had a few hundred men who toppled the Taliban regime, and we were very popular before we started putting a lot of troops in. And so instead of billion-dollar victories, because we refused to empower people, we are turning them into trillion-dollar quagmires. And this is something that we still need to learn if we are to succeed in the challenges we face. Lithuania has been always at the forefront of freedom. We say America is exceptional. Lithuania's love for freedom was also exceptional in helping lead the other groups out of the Soviet Union and facing down the Red Army. Now together, we are here to help the United States employ its most powerful ideals to win in the difficult years ahead. Thank you very much.
One personal remark. My school, secondary school, was very close to TV tower that was attacked. Now it is called January 13 school. And well, 6 of my colleagues and friends died during that attack. I survived. But on this occasion, and I told the same to President Obama when I kind of presented my credentials, I'm really grateful for people like you, like Colonel Antanas Jurgaitis, who've been creating Lithuanian army, that you've been able to save that freedom, and that we are all able, to gather here after 20 years of our independence, after 20 years of those events that we'll soon celebrate in January. And now when I chair a strange organization called Community of Democracies, I always try to remind those people and nations around, you should never take freedom and democracy for granted. You should fight for it every day.